The numbers of Iraqi and Afghani civilians just who have been run over by American vehicles, who barrel through these mud-walled villages at 50 or 60 miles an hour. And the reason they don't stop is that even if, for instance, they get to a traffic jam or they get to a certain point where they can't move, if they don't get hit, they can be damn sure the next time they show up, they will be hit. So movement is key. Every time you leave the perimeter, you move. Anytime you come under attack, you deploy absolutely everything at your disposal, especially if it's a small unit, which includes air power. And there may be people in this room who have been around 1,000-pound iron fragmentation bombs. When these explosive devices go off, they throw out deadly bits of shrapnel up to a radius of over a half mile. One the size of a nickel can kill you. So the very idea of human rights as an issue within a combat zone, for those of us who have been there, is farcical. It doesn't exist. Once you employ the weapons of war, then any talk of virtue, any talk of promoting anything other than death, which is of course the essence of war, becomes folly. And I think for part of the frustration for those of us who have spent as many years as I have within war zones is that the disconnect between the way we talk about war, the kind of bloodless language we use about policy, and the reality of the killing. You know, when people are killed in war, it's not like on the movies or the TV. Killing another human being is far more akin to butchering an animal. It takes often many hours for them to die in excruciating and agonizing pain. In the first Gulf War, for instance, I saw an Iraqi soldier, an Iraqi unit that surrendered to us. Almost all the units surrendered. They hadn't had any water for many days. And we had an Iraqi soldier who stepped on an anti-tank mine, blew both his legs off, and he sat in the sand for 6 hours until he died. That's the reality of war. The capacity to show us the reality of war is technologically within our reach, but it will never happen. Because if you saw the images of war as they really are, you would be so revolted and appalled, you would never be able to support war again. And the complicity of the media in sanitizing the reality of war, in turning it into a mythic narrative of our hometown hero, of this slavish devotion to the great leader, whether it's Schwarzkopf or Crystal or anyone else,
your wife will be feeling well.
is part of cramming war into that narrative structure that makes war not only palatable but heroic. All those abstract terms that we use to describe war, glory, honor, heroism, duty, become, after about 30 seconds of combat, hollow, if not obscene. And the frustration for those who come back from war, including the veterans, is that in some ways they lack the language by which to communicate. Because anybody who speaks honestly about war would weep. Anybody who speaks honestly about war would pour forth emotions with a kind of hysteria that would be unpalatable to the larger public. And so those of us who return from war are forced in many ways into a kind of rational discourse that by its very nature masks the reality of war itself. Anytime soldiers or Marines feel afraid, they have seconds with which to respond. And if you have been in combat, you understand how inevitable civilian casualties are. Because if you make the wrong decision, if that woman walking towards you in fact has an explosive device hidden on their body, then you and your companions, your comrades around you can die. And so that palpable sense of fear, again, that's something that when we see images of war, we're not conscious of course, along with the smells, the noise, the disorientation. And the quote at the beginning of Hurt Locker was from my book, Wars, of course, that gives us meaning, where I talk about war as a drug. the war is a drug. War is the most powerful narcotic invented by humankind. And when you stand in the midst of a landscape of war, you can, in the course of a few hours, replicate every synthetic drug trip known to mankind. Exhaustion, utter exhaustion where you never sleep, a kind of zombie-like hashish haze. When you're in the midst of combat, it's a kind of Zen experience where you're present in ways that you never were before. Even colors are brighter. The hallucinogenic and horrifying visions that war coughs up. I remember in the bombings in Sarajevo, which again were heavily sensitized. If you ever, the images, as disturbing as they were, that came out of Sarajevo, never began to show what these shells do to human bodies. And the use of these kinds of weapon systems in places where civilians live, and remember that 80% of the civilians in Afghanistan reside in rural areas. Only 20% live in urban areas. We've absolutely replicated the occupation of the Red Army. Go back and read what happened to the Red Army. We are playing it out to a T, where we control the urban areas, sort of, like Kandahar, where the Taliban, they never know who the Taliban is. I have friends of mine based in Kabul who actually interviewed Taliban leaders in coffee shops in Kabul. The final point that I want to make is that when you invade and occupy a country, the only language that a country where you're culturally, historically, and linguistically illiterate, the only language you speak is the language of violence. And when you speak exclusively to people in the language of violence, that becomes the language by which they speak back to you. And those people who collaborate with you, whether it's the Karzais, whether it's the informants, and remember that when we have informants, they do it for money, are always the sleaziest, most duplicitous, most compromised characters within the country. And I can guarantee you, having watched it in El Salvador, when I went to Salvador, the death squads were killing between 700 and 1,000 people a month. Most of the people killed by the death squads were killed for personal vendettas. And the same thing is happening on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we've seen it in some of these reports. It's that rival clan that's having a wedding party. And you tell the commanders, who don't speak a word of Dari, that there's a Taliban gathering, and that clan is obliterated, and your clan becomes ascendant in that valley. I have a friend in Afghanistan who said the Taliban, forget the Taliban, it doesn't exist. The whole idea of a Taliban is a mirage. It's valleyism. Everybody has their own valley. The web of loyalties, the web of deceit, coupled with our staggering ignorance, coupled with the fact that we are reduced to the most primitive form of communication, which is killing and death, means that, of course, we have become the most potent and powerful recruiting weapon that Islamic militants have throughout the Middle East. Thank you.